What's up, everybody? This is Joseph and Ray, and we're here again with the third installment of Ask EVGA, a segment where you can ask questions in the comment section below, and we'll go ahead and read through those and ask them here on this platform. So we're just going to jump right into it. The first question is going to be for you, Ray, and that is, what is the 6-pin PCIe power connector on the motherboard for?
Okay. I'll clarify this on EVGA boards specifically. You'll usually see some boards, not all of them, you'll see a 6-pin power connector, usually at the bottom of the board underneath all of your PCIe slots. That's pretty common, especially on our boards that have more than 2 or 3 slots. It is supplementary power for the PCI Express slots. Allows you to kind of circumvent some of that 12-volt power that comes from your 24-pin, which is particularly useful on like the lowermost slots because the trace run from the 24-pin down to that slot is pretty long, and so you get an efficiency boost if you're sending power from the bottom because it's right there. It is optional. If you're running a single card, you can leave it unplugged. You're not going to notice any kind of difference. We do recommend it if you're going to do an SLI, especially if you're doing a 3 or a 4-way on older cards. That's really good idea to put in that supplementary power so that you're making sure that all those cards get as much power as they can from the slots, and then the rest will come from the PCIe cables. But ultimately, it's just to help your system be a little bit more hardcore if you're running multiple cards.
Yeah. And our manuals for the motherboards do also have a little section in there on each of the manuals nowadays that gives you a little bit more information on that as well. So
yep,
check that out.
Yep. All right, next question. This is for Joseph. How are the PCIe lanes distributed, and does that matter in terms of what device is installed?
Okay, so the PCIe lane distribution, it is going to be a little bit different for Intel versus AMD. Sure. I'm just going to talk about Intel because that's basically what our boards deal with. You're going to have 3 different things. You have the CPU, which can supply lanes. You're going to have a PCH, which is the chipset on the motherboard, and then sometimes you have a PEX or PLX chip. That you don't see too much these days, at least not on our boards. We don't have them anymore. Might be something you'll see again, but those will just add additional lanes. The CPU will provide generally the lanes that are going to be distributed for the graphics cards. So that's why a lot of people, consider more lanes on a CPU better, because they will distribute that to GPUs. Right. Generally, a PCH is only going to supply them in X4 increments. Right. So the X4 isn't going to supply something like SLI. Right. Although you could do that with Crossfire, but at the same time, you are going to want to get usually X8 out of a PCIe Gen 3. Right. Although it doesn't make too much of a difference these days as far as performance, with Gen 3 speeds, the actual theoretical bandwidth is so high that it's far beyond what a graphics card can pull as far as X16 is concerned. Right. So that is kind of another question we usually get: is it's X8 and X16, does that matter? Right. Or a lot of people just upset that they don't have X16 on, say, both cards. That really does not matter. You're looking at, in most real world testing, about a 1 to 2% difference. So that's kind of the basic distribution. PCH will generally handle all the other slots, or M.2 or things like that are going to max out at X4.
Right. Yeah, and actually I think that's, for me, that's kind of where you want the most bandwidth anyways, M.2s, because those are the ones right now that I feel are the most limited by PCI Express speeds, but that'll change in the future.
Yeah.
Right.
And just one more thing to mention too, the PLX or PEX chips, there tends to be latency issues with those. Right. So that's why they usually aren't on boards, and they're also very expensive.
Right. Yeah, usually high-end boards, because additional cost, as he said, there's some additional latency. So like on X299 boards, you don't see that as much. Yeah. We don't have them anymore on those boards because more lanes are being provided by Intel with the processor. So there's less and less of a need of it. Plus, you don't have to deal with the latency. So there's advantages all around doing it that way.
Right. So the next question for Ray here: why is my card not on the step-up list, and does this mean I cannot step up my graphics card? This is actually something I saw in the comment section on our step-up video from a couple people, so I just wanted to make sure that we sort of clarify what that is exactly.
Okay. And if you didn't see the step-up video, you still have some want to know generally how it works, we can put that link in the description as well. As far as the step-up list is concerned, a lot of people miss the part on the step-up where it says, what can I step up to? There's not a specific list of what you can step up from. So essentially, if you have a graphics card, an EVGA card,
Yeah.
it's got a KR suffix at the end of it. It tells you that it's a 3-year warranty product, and it's something that you purchased within the last 90 days. You have from an authorized retailer, you have your invoice, then it will qualify. So there are some cases, if you went out and you already have a 1080 Ti FTW3 high-end,
Right.
you're not going to find anything on the step-up list because that's as high as it goes. So there's no real options there, but there's options for lower end products. What you can step up to is what's on that list, but what you can step up from, there's a lot more options. So if you have any questions on that, 24/7 customer support, feel free to ask us. All right, next question. This one is for Joseph. This one comes up a lot, and it's particularly important as we are a big power supply manufacturer. What are these 80+ ratings for power supplies? What do they mean?
Okay. Yeah, so generally there's going to be two things that mostly matter to most consumers as far as power supplies are concerned, and that's the wattage capacity,
Sure.
and then the efficiency rating, which is the 80+ is actually an efficiency rating. There's generally it spans from what we call white, which would be the lowest end, just the 80+, to titanium, and you have a bunch of different rare metals in between.
Exactly.
We're going to put a graphic up on here, but essentially you're looking at the rating generally will be concerned with 20%, 50%, and 100% load. So meeting a minimum efficiency in percentage based on what percentage of load is applied to the power supply. And you'll notice if you do look at like some of the graphs online and things like that, that there's actually a curve. The maximum efficiency for most power supplies is reached somewhere between 50 to 60%, and then it at the low load and the high load ends, you tend to have a little bit less efficiency. So the 80+ ratings do take that into account. We're looking at about well, at least from the bottom rating, it's going to be at least 80% efficiency across the board, and at the titanium level, you're looking in the 90s, so 92, 94, and 91 respectively, to 20 and 50 and 100% load.
Right. Just to clarify that, what we mean by percent efficiency, basically of the power that's coming out of your wall in AC, this is the amount that you're generating in DC.
Yeah.
So if you're pulling 500 watts from the wall and you've got 80% efficiency, then you should be getting 400 watts in DC going to your devices.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that's calculated. And the rest of it, it's important because what you're losing in efficiency becomes heat.
Yes.
So
yeah.
the higher titanium ones, are ones where you'll often see maybe lower watt versions that have absolutely no fan in them.
Mm-hmm.
There are some fanless ones in titanium. Because of that super high efficiency produces so much less heat. So for a lot of people, my personal opinion, the perfect spot is the gold rating.
Yeah,
that's kind of what most people shoot for. Gold rating power supplies are really good.
Yeah, those tend to be the highest selling units on the market.
Right.
Is gold rating. That's pretty much a really great efficiency level.
Right.
And you tend to get at gold rating and higher, you get higher quality components in most power supplies.
Right.
So keep that in mind as
Right.
well, the capacitors or whatever. For us, we tend to have really high quality components in pretty much all the
Right.
units except for the very budget models. Might sacrifice a bit on like capacitors or something like that, but in general, I think most of ours have 100% Japanese capacitors, if not the majority.
Yeah, I think almost all of them do, if not all of them. And that, I don't know how this works with other manufacturers, but I know that for us, as you go up in efficiency, you tend to also increase in the warranty that we provide on them, all the way up to 10 years on the gold, platinum, titanium ones.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big pull for us. Okay, so the next question for Ray here is, how hot is too hot when it comes to GPUs?
Okay. In terms of graphics cards and temperatures, this is a question we get a lot. This is one of the big questions that customers call in all the time, and it's because it's one of those components where It's really common to monitor temperatures on your graphics card, which is not something that you do on a lot of other components. And most people are not looking at their hard drive temperatures or even their motherboard PCH temperatures, things like that. But the graphics card, a lot of people do look at that. And what I will say, it's pretty rare to have one that's actually genuinely overheating. You're talking more than 90 Celsius. And even if you're running at about 90 Celsius, that is within the spec for the card. Now, what will that do long term to the card? Well, it may shorten the life of it if it's always running at that type of temperature, but honestly, I run 90 Celsius cards. I used to do a lot of 24/7 rendering, video rendering, but mostly 3D modeling. And that type of workload, I think, is one of the most difficult workloads on GPUs, and you can get years out of a card, even at 24/7. So I would say not worry too much about temperatures. Mostly you want to try to find that balance, sort of that noise normalized performance, where you've got a certain amount of noise that you're willing to accept, and you try to get the lowest temperatures within that. In general, if you're running a high-end card, I have a 1080 Ti. It was one that we talked about when we were trying to beat it in our overclocking video. If I'm not running an overclock on that, I get around 72 Celsius under a full gaming load. Perfectly fine temperature for it. If I am overclocking it, maybe it's a hot day as well. Highest I've seen is about 77. Again, completely fine, well within what we would expect for the card. And at those temperatures, I don't expect any kind of longevity issues with the card. And we have other solutions too. If you want to go water cooling, you really want low temperatures. The advantage with the really low temperatures is not necessarily longevity so much as it plays really nicely with NVIDIA Boost 3.0. So if you're trying to do maximum clocks and you want it to maintain those clocks, really low temperatures available with like liquid cooling or even liquid nitrogen cooling if you're going for records, that's the way to go. But for most people, air cooling, perfectly fine. You don't usually have to worry too much about the temperatures.
You'll get more stable performance at a lower temperature, I'd say, but usually that doesn't translate to too much of a difference when you're actually talking real world experience. And the graphics cards also, what I tend to see with the high end is probably 80s is usually what I see. To be honest,
it's pretty typical.
70s, there's a lot of factors involved. So you're talking airflow in the case, ambient temperature outside or in the room, you know, a number of different things that are going to affect that temperature. So you can always call our support and we can help you try and adjust your setup to see if you can maximize the cooling in that sort of scenario if you feel it's too warm.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question here. This one's a bit of a fun one for Joseph, and I will actually both answer this one. But I'll ask Joseph, what is your favorite graphics card of all time?
Gosh, I would probably have to say the 8800 GTS is something that it's probably the first real performance card that I owned when I did my first build, and I've got some pretty funny pictures of my first build my friend snapped of me because I was wearing the little magnifying goggles, like magnifying lenses and stuff. I had the anti-static wrist strap. You know, I went the whole 9 yards because I was afraid.
Before you gave up on all that, now you just throw them together.
Funny little story too is I did end up grabbing a CPU from a retail place and you know, was waiting to get the rest of the components for my build, and I actually opened up the box later when I was ready to build, and there was no CPU in the box. Luckily, someone at that store had, you know, maybe an employee or something. Nobody's really sure, but a lot of them were missing after all. So they went back and checked, and they were able to reimburse me with another CPU in that case. But I was pretty worried at that point because, you know, a couple weeks later, I was like, they're not going to believe that this.
What CPU was that?
That was, gosh, what is it called? Q9450.
Oh, okay, Yorkfield.
Yeah, Yorkfield, and that was when that was brand new. I bought it like the week that it came out.
Yeah, those are good, actually. Those are good processors.
Yeah, I ended up upgrading to Q6600 after that.
I actually had the same exact graphics card, 8800 GTS. You'll see that in a future video. We're doing a bit of a fun one with that card, so I'll talk about it more there. But I totally agree with you. For me, that was like the Oblivion card. That was the Crisis card. That was a lot of stuff at that time.
The Crisis card.
Well, it wasn't, but it was. It wasn't. It wasn't.
That was the first. I tested Crisis with that card, so to me, that's the Crisis card.
I think it was 720p medium settings was about all I could do with it, but Even now, Crysis is still pretty hard to run. I'll answer that question too. What is my favorite? My favorite graphics card is one that I owned, and it's actually one that I did a lot of that 3D modeling on. That was part of the reason why I bought it, and that was the original GTX Titan.
Oh, nice.
The original Titan, great card. It's really cool because they launched a whole new name, and it was like, this is not the numbers. It has a name. It's its own thing. One really cool thing that NVIDIA did that they actually haven't done in later generations was it was a fully 64-bit floating point processor. It had 896 64-bit floating point processors, 2,688 of the CUDA cores, 32-bit cores. They hadn't done half precision yet. 16 is only coming in the newer generation stuff.
Yeah.
Volta specifically, I think, focuses on 16 from what they've shown so far. And so the Titan was really something amazing. It was like really cool. You're the kid on the block who's got the Titan card.
Yeah, that must have been cool.
It was cool, and I liked how they made the blower and the PCB had very little headroom. I think you could push that power target to 106, and that was it. And at 106, you were hitting power limit, and at the blower fan spinning at a high speed, that was sort of at the limit of temperature. But it was really balanced, so you knew that the card was running as fast as it could run. There wasn't much more you could get out of it. So that was one cool aspect of it.
I didn't know that stuff. I didn't know that much about the Titan.
Yeah.
So that's
well,
quite
I
interesting.
lived with one for a number of years. So
Yeah, I remember the ads when that first came out, and I was looking on the NVIDIA website, and I was just,
Yeah.
oh man, if I only had $1,000 or whatever it was at the time, I was in love with that card, and the marketing campaign on that was pretty epic.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah. I justified it as a school purchase. This is 3D modeling. This is a school purchase.
Oh, that is in that case, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't game on it at all. No.
Lies. Okay, so in the last questions also, well, actually no, I should.
Yeah, one more question.
What was the other one? Oh yeah. Okay. Okay, so the next question for you is going to be regarding the memory bit width on graphics cards, and it's kind of a general question that I see a lot of times. So I don't actually have a formulated question, but essentially, how much that affects things. Is that ever going to be too low or too high of a spec? Because I see a lot of people concerned about the fact that, say, a particular model of GPU has a lower bit width than the other cards that are higher end. So does that affect things too much, and how much are we talking?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people actually get, from a performance standpoint, they kind of get hung up on bit width, memory bit width. Yeah. I've actually had customers who thought that the memory bit width, or like 192-bit, was the bit width that could be processed, like it could do 192-bit files kind of thing. No, it's not. It's not the registry. It's not the register. That's still going to be 32 and 64. Basically, it's one measure of the card's performance, but you can't really get the VRAM performance unless you multiply the speed of your memory modules times that bit width. Essentially, every little memory module is going to have a number of pins on it. So, as an example, if you have a 1080 Ti, it's got 11 memory chips on it. One of them was pulled off of the Titan X cards. Yeah. Each of those memory modules has 32 pins, 32-bit. So essentially, when you add together the entire bus, which is a ring bus that goes all the way around your GPU, you get 352, because that's 11 times 32. So that's the bit width. But to get the actual performance, you have to multiply that times the speed of the chips themselves.
Right.
So there have been cases where NVIDIA, like the 960, was a replacement to the 760, and there was actually a pretty large reduction in both bit width, and actually even, I believe, memory bandwidth went down as well. So actual memory bandwidth fell. Now, the performance of the 960 was still a little bit higher.
Right.
And because bit width in those chips is really expensive, it allowed them to bring that card, that level of performance, in at a lower price and maintain that performance. And it's also a little apples and oranges, because when NVIDIA brought out the Maxwell architecture on the 900 series, they also started to introduce really good memory compression. So on the fly, you're compressing the stuff that's held in your memory, and they say it's something like 20 to 40% when you go over all the generations that they've been able to improve effective bandwidth just by adding in that compression. So hard to compare from card to card. I will say, for the vast majority of cards, when they're designing these things in the very beginning, they know how much they need
Yeah.
to get you the performance that they want out of that card. So usually not something you have to be too concerned about.
Yeah. It's certainly not an arbitrary number.
It's
that
not
they just
arbitrary at
pick.
all, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of engineering that goes into that, and a lot of decision making in the process before the actual card is made or before that's laid out. So
Yeah, I don't think you could ever have too high of a bit width, but at the same time, then price becomes a factor. You want to get this card at a good price, and
Right.
if they're designing it with so much
Yeah.
memory bandwidth, then potentially you're going to lose out a little bit on your GPU die.
yeah.
So,
And there's a good analogy on that too that a lot of people use as the bit width is technically like lanes on a highway,
Mhm.
and the frequency would be
sort of the speed. Yeah.
limit of the highway. So a lot of times you can have a lower amount of lanes but a faster speed limit, and you're still getting all that
Right.
data through there.
Right, same
efficiently.
amount of data can get through. So yeah,
Right.
exactly. So basically every generation, we're going to see the speed limit in that sense improve. I've never
Yes.
seen it go down.
No.
Every generation of memory is a little bit faster. So they could continually reduce bandwidth, and you would still end up with effectively equal memory performance. But you want
Right.
that to go up generation to generation.
Correct. Yeah, and then this last one's going to be for
It's
both
going to be a
of us as
double
well.
question as
Right.
well. Okay.
What is your favorite PC game of all time?
Favorite PC game of all time? For me, this one's a really easy question because this just changed my world when I first learned about and played Half-Life 2.
Oh, okay.
This was when Steam was brand new. It was really hard to log into Steam. I don't know why their servers were having problems. They had first put up the demo.
Yeah.
At that time, I think I had an Inspiron 9300 laptop. It had an Radeon X300 and 64 megabytes of video RAM, which for me, having a laptop that had dedicated video memory was a big deal. And so even though it chugged terribly through that game, and I remember one hot summer day, I was getting towards the end, I think there's a courtyard sequence with a bunch of the walkers. You're outside of sort of a courtroom
Yeah.
towards the end, and you're leading a party. I believe it overheated and turned off 3 times while I was doing that
Oh, no.
day on that laptop. And so that actually, for me, was one of the realizations that I can build a gaming computer for this. So we talked about the 8800. I did buy that partially to play Crysis, but I actually bought it also to just play Half-Life 2 on max settings.
That's
And
awesome.
the narrative, everything about that
Oh,
game
yeah.
is just whoa to me. It just blew me away. I didn't know you could do that with a game.
Yeah, that game was certainly a legendary game, and still is today. It's a
Yeah,
great game.
it still
You can
is,
even
yeah.
play that game today,
Right.
and no problems with that. I love that game. Mine's a little bit interesting because I tend to be a retro gamer.
Okay.
So I've got a lot of consoles and things
Is it
like
Commander King?
that. Gosh, man, now you just messed me up. Well, okay. I guess I'd have to separate it into
Joseph,
two
what
things.
is your forum avatar right now?
Yeah, no, true. I would have to separate it to two things then, I guess,
Okay.
because my favorite modern PC game is going to be Witcher 3.
Okay.
I absolutely love the game. I think it's so well fleshed out. I wish there was a good mixture of, say, like Skyrim lore with the Witcher 3 mechanics and stuff, and that would be like the perfect game for me as far as a modern game. Because I like the dragon stuff a little bit more
Okay.
than the Witcher kind of things. But man, I can't say enough good stuff about that game. And they had an amazing DLC, the Blood and Wine,
Yeah.
which was just so expansive. Probably the best DLC I've ever paid money for.
How many more hours did you say you put in with just that
Oh
experience?
gosh, I don't know, because I've played the game so many times, including through the DLC, and I mean, I go all the way every single time. So I keep making decisions. I'll play the game, I'll make a certain decision, and then I'm like, man, I wish I made this other decision.
So you have to go back.
Yeah, the first time I let the Red Baron die,
Okay.
he hung himself or whatever, and then I go through it again, and I forgot where I was supposed to sort of change things up to get him not to hang himself. Hung himself again. I went and finished the whole game in the DLC anyways, and I was like, I'll come back again and I'll save you, man. So yeah, I actually did that. But let's go back to man, my old days, Commander Keen.
Okay.
I had a Commodore 64 when I was a kid. My dad had gotten one of those, and not a lot of friends had PCs at that time. And I was real young. I had a slightly older brother, so he's the one who got all the games and got me into it. But man, Commander Keen, great series. Probably Commander Keen 4.
Okay.
I don't think that's the vegetable one. If it's the vegetable one, then no.
I don't remember.
like it.
I haven't beaten for it. I do remember I played because I bought I think there was a compilation that came out recently. And I was playing through those.
Yeah, man, I love the Commander Keen games. There's a whole bunch of games from back then that I really loved. There was the Bruce Lee fighting game, which was so basic but so fun.
That was a
if
64.
anyone's ever played that, you'll know what I'm talking about. And a ton of other games too. And a lot of the big developers from back then, a lot of the guys who worked for, like, say, Apogee or different companies back then who were making games, later went on to, places like id Software and Sierra and all these great companies who make excellent games today or made excellent games, after the Commodore 64. So, man, those were great times.
I mean, think of what, Apogee and what it does for modern gaming as far as going on, like everything is built on the Quake engine. In some way or another, everything is built on the Quake engine.
Yeah.
So if you go back far enough, you're looking ancestrally how important those series are for PC gaming in general. I mean, there wouldn't be Half-Life 2 without a Commander Keen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think.
Now I do have one more question.
Okay.
Is it really?
It's not on the list.
It's not Apogee. It's a Apogee.
I've always heard Apogee.
Apogee.
I've heard Apogee. I don't know.
I never knew that. So I might have been saying it wrong my whole life.
It's a shout out to LGR because he always says Apogee, so I'm going to go with him.
Okay, there you go. All right, well, that's basically it. Yeah.
All right. Well, that does it for this week. Thank you guys for watching. We'll have more questions from you in coming weeks. Again, this will be a weekly release, so we'll catch you on the next episode.
Yep. Leave some comments below.
Goodbye.
Bye. Did it overheat again? All right, it's still recording.